So, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a fascinating look at a 50-year-old South American dictatorship, a modern American political meme, and like the really complex anatomy of how historical narratives are actually built.
Yeah, it's a huge topic. And our source today is this incredibly detailed narrative analysis report, complete with a full fact check of a very specific media moment.
Right. And before we get into it, I want to make something super clear to everyone listening. This is an impartiality disclaimer, which is, crucial framing for today.
Absolutely.
The source material we're looking at contains some heavily politically charged content. It involves both left-wing and right-wing figures. And I just want to emphasize that as hosts, we are absolutely not taking sides here.
Right. We are not endorsing any of the political viewpoints discussed.
Exactly. Our job is simply to impartially unpack the ideas, and report on the fascinating mechanics of narrative building that are contained in the original source material. We're just looking at how the machine works.
Right. So the setup for this whole analysis is a specific catalyst. It's an episode of the political show Louder with Crowder from July 28th, 2026.
Okay.
And during this show, a historical claim was made about Augusto Pinochet's regime in Chile.
Yeah, and the core claim we are unpacking today is a direct quote. The host said, "Sure, you had a few communists who went for helicopter rides, but if you weren't a communist, you weren't at great risk."
Which is, it's a wild thing to hear on a modern talk show.
Oh, yeah.
But before we can understand why that claim is mostly false, we have to understand why it works at all on an audience.
Right. Why does it stick?
Exactly. So the report moves into this concept of how narratives use a verifiable kernel of truth, what they call the ballast, to smuggle in a massive distortion, which is the payload.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's like hiding a pill in a piece of cheese for a dog.
That is a perfect analogy, yeah.
Right. The verifiable, striking detail that people thrown from helicopters is the cheese. It distracts you from inspecting the pill, which is the word few.
Exactly. Because the cheese, in this case, the helicopter rides, it's not a myth. The Chilean army actually admitted to them in 2001.
Which is just chilling.
It is. Under this initiative, which had the incredibly dark name, Operation Retiro de Televisores.
Wait, Operation Removal of Television Sets?
Yes, that was the official name. And under that operation, anywhere from 120 to at least 400 political detainees were bound to heavy rail tracks and thrown into the ocean to hide their bodies.
Oh my God.
So that's the ballast. And there's more ballast, too. The report notes there was real left-wing violence at the time. For example, the Manuel Rodriguez Patriotic Front killed 5 of Pinochet's bodyguards in an ambush in 1986.
So there was actual armed conflict happening.
Right. And the show also cited a 1,600% inflation statistic, which sounds totally made up, but it's actually a real annualized mid-1973 metric for Chile.
Okay, so if you're a listener and you Google the inflation rate or the helicopter drops or the bodyguard ambush, it all checks out.
It all checks out. The ballast works. And that brings us to the payload, the distortion. We transition from the true method of the violence to the totally false scale of it.
Right, the danger of that little word, a few.
Exactly. The source actually gives the claim in the video a mostly false rating with a 0.12 truth score. Because how wrong is the word few? Well, Chile's own post-dictatorship state convened 2 truth commissions to find out.
And this wasn't like partisan advocates doing the counting, right?
No, this was the state itself investigating its own recent history. The 1991 Rettig report documented 2,279 people killed and roughly 1,200 disappeared.
That's already way more than a few.
And then it gets worse. The Valech report, which came out in 2004 and 2005 and was expanded in 2011, documented over 38,000 political prisoners.
38,000.
Yes. And it explicitly noted that torture was a state policy, affecting roughly 94% of those detainees.
I mean, I have to jump in here. When a claim is off by 3 or 4 orders of magnitude, how does it survive in public discourse? I mean, a few describes 400 people the way a few describes a packed sports stadium.
Right, it's an absurd minimization.
So how does anyone hear that and just nod along?
Well, the report explains that the true power of the narrative isn't in the math. It's not about the numbers for the listener. It's in the psychological comfort that it offers.
Comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It leads us right into the illusion of the safe harbor. This addresses the second half of that claim. If you weren't a communist, you weren't at great risk.
Right. So, like, if you just keep your head down and you're not a radical, you're fine.
Which is completely false. The centrist opposition, the Christian Democrats, they actually supported the coup initially. But they were outlawed in 1977.
Wow, even the supporters got outlawed.
Yeah, their co-founder Bernardo Leighton was actually shot in Rome by regime operatives. And the violence even reached U.S. soil. In 1976, a car bomb went off at Sheridan Circle in Washington, D.C.
Wait, really? A car bomb in D.C.?
Yes. It killed Socialist Orlando Letelier, but it also killed Ronni Karpen Moffitt, who was a 25-year-old American woman with literally no connection to Chilean politics at all.
Oh, man. So she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Exactly. And other American citizens were killed too, like Charles Horman, Frank Tarugi, and a math professor named Boris Weisfeller.
So the safe harbor thing is just a total myth.
Complete myth. There was a British doctor, Sheila Cassidy, who was brutally tortured just for treating a wounded patient.
Just for doing her job as a doctor.
Yep. And it gets even more horrific. 2 teenagers, including a 19-year-old photographer named Rodrigo Rojas, were literally set on fire by soldiers at a street protest.
That is just, I can't even wrap my head around that.
The terror was so widespread that about 2% of the entire country, roughly 200,000 people, fled into exile.
Okay, so if non-communists were clearly targeted doctors, American bystanders, teenagers, why is this safe harbor myth so appealing to listeners? Like, why do they want to believe it?
Because listeners desperately want a threshold. A regime with no threshold where anyone can be grabbed at any time for any reason is just unbearable to imagine.
It's terrifying.
Right. The report notes this is mirrored in a phrase from Argentina during their own dirty war era, algo habrán hecho.
What does that mean?
It translates to, they must have done something. It's a rationalization that neighbors use to pretend the violence isn't arbitrary. If the secret police take your neighbor, you tell yourself they must have been a secret radical so that you can feel safe in your own bed.
Oh, wow. So saying it was just a few communists is basically the modern American version of they must have done something. It's a psychological defense mechanism.
Exactly. And that brings us to the convergence of 2 tracks. The report looks at how 1973 is meeting 2026.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because why is this specific historical distortion airing right now, today?
Well, there's track 1, which is Chilean negationism. This defense of the regime has existed in Chile for 50 years, but it's growing. In 2023, polling showed 36% of Chileans felt the coup was justified.
Which was up from what, like 16% a decade earlier?
Right, a massive jump. And then in March 2026, Jose Antonio Cast was inaugurated as president with 58% of the vote.
And he's a Pinochet defender, right?
Yes. He previously said opponents weren't locked up, and his election basically restored Pinochet's legacy on a state level. So that's the political reality in South America.
Okay, so what's track 2?
Track 2 is the American meme. The whole helicopter ride joke started as a Facebook shitpost in 2015 featuring Bernie Sanders.
I remember seeing those.
Yeah. It evolved through 4chan, got picked up by groups like the Proud Boys, and eventually merged with mainstream political commentary.
That is so crazy. You have literal Chilean state politics and American 4chan meme culture shaking hands in 2026, essentially using the exact same argument for 2 completely different audiences.
It's a bizarre convergence. And part of how they justify it in the U.S. is with this economic counter-argument. You'll hear that Pinochet's economy was a miracle, so the violence was worth it.
Right, the whole he saved the economy narrative. Does the report fact-check that too?
Yes. And it points out that even libertarian outlets like Reason Magazine strongly criticize this framing. They note that poverty was at 40% when the dictatorship ended.
40% poverty is not an economic miracle.
Not at all. Plus, there was a massive crash in 1982 where the GDP fell by 13 to 14%. So the economic justification is just as distorted as the casualty numbers.
Okay, so we've got the ballast, the payload, the psychological safe harbor, and this weird meme convergence. How does the media actually deploy these narratives structurally?
That's section 5 of the report, the architecture of the narrative. It looks at 2 concepts. The first is the violence ledger inversion.
The violence ledger inversion, what does that mean?
The source notes that the exact same political show, in the exact same month, scored a .7070, mostly true for taking human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia very seriously.
Oh, interesting.
But then it scored a .12 for minimizing Pinochet's atrocities. It maximizes out-group violence while minimizing in-group violence.
Ah, I see. So if the bad guys do it, it's a horrific crime against humanity. But if our side's historical proxy does it, it was just a few communists who got helicopter rides.
Exactly. It flips the ledger depending on the political utility of the violence.
And how did the segment actually end?
It ended with a presupposition terminal.
Oh, what?
The segment closed with a joke. The host said, the natives of Chile did develop a persistent fear of helicopters.
Yikes.
Right. And the report points out that a joke has no truth value. It can't be fact-checked.
Oh, wow. So what does this all mean? The joke isn't just a throwaway gag, it's the armor.
Yes, exactly. Humor acts as the terminal stage of a claim's life.
Because if you try to argue with it, they just say, relax, it's just a joke. The punchline is a receipt for a belief that no longer needs arguing.
You nailed it. It bypasses critical thinking entirely. You laugh, you accept the premise, and the distortion is locked in.
That is incredibly dark, but also kind of a genius media strategy.
It is a highly effective way to rewrite history without ever having to defend the actual facts.
So, just to summarize this whole journey, we started with a verifiable kernel of truth, the actual helicopter drops, and watched it get used to erase 38,000 victims.
Right.
We looked at the illusion of a political safe harbor where people pretend that only bad guys get targeted so they can feel safe.
Yep. They must have done something defense.
And then we saw this strange marriage of South American state negationism with American internet memes, culminating in jokes that act as armor against fact-checkers.
It really is a masterclass in how narratives are built and maintained. And again, just to reiterate our neutral stance, this isn't about endorsing the politics of either side. We're just looking at the mechanics of the persuasion.
Right. We're just looking at the blueprint. Which leaves us with a final lingering question for you to ponder on your own.
It's a heavy one.
We've explored how a horrifying historical reality was smoothed into an internet joke to create a psychological safe harbor. Look at the media you consume today. What other complex historical atrocities are currently being flattened into simple, comfortable punchlines just so we can convince ourselves that we, too, would be safe?